Okay, so to kick things off, I'm honored to present our first keynote speaker at Equilibrium, Matthew Bonney. Matthew Bonney is the Vice President and Chief Product Security Officer for Honeywell Corporation. He is responsible for leading the product cybersecurity and privacy program and strategy for Honeywell. He leads a global team of talented security professionals who use a secure by design and by default approach to enhance the security in the products they sell to their customers. If you have any questions for Matthew, please add them into the Q&A and he will answer them at the end. Matthew, I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, thanks for having me here to speak to all of you today. Let me see if I can get my screen sharing fun going here. So bear with me here a half second. Share my screen. We'll get started. Hopefully all of you can see my screen now. Let's see. All right. Hey, again, thank you for having me today. I thought I would sort of kick things off with tell you a little bit about my company. That's Honeywell. We have over 100,000 employees with about a bit over 7,000 developers. As you can see, we have 4 major business units with a 5th, focused on software and the connected platforms. And as you can see, each one of them is sort of focused on different markets, but working together to support common customers and strategies from aviation, buildings, critical infrastructure, warehousing technology, and personal protection. And as you can see, we have a very diverse portfolio of products. And that's kind of where my team comes into play. I have a team of about 160 dedicated cyber experts who are focused on ensuring those products are secure by design and by default. So with that, let's jump into this agenda, right? I want to focus on really 3 things today that have helped me build a sustainable and robust program, and largely for securing software and the systems that we support. And then we'll spend a little time on QA. So let's jump right in. So, and the winners for 2020 are COVID and ransomware, right? It's been a crazy last 18 months, right? Between COVID and the plethora of cyber attacks, it's brought security to the forefront of our lives, our families, how we get gas, go to the bank, how do we connect with our family and friends, and how do we travel, right? In so many ways, the concept and challenges are quite similar between these 2 problem sets, right? With COVID, we know, hey, go get vaccinated. We have to look at ways to vaccinate our companies from these digital risks we're facing too. And that's where today's discussion really kicks in. It's about ways to embrace security and privacy into the software and systems that we develop for our customers and for ourselves. So infection is not the only things that are impacting our companies, right? As you can see, supply chain attacks rose quite a bit in Q1 and are continuing to go. I don't know if you guys have noticed or seen this latest issue that's cropped up recently, which is RockU 2021, 8.4 billion passwords that have been leaked online. If it comes out to be the case, this is going to be one of the largest caches of passwords ever, right? And of course, you've got global regulations. Some of those some of them you don't, right? This is a quickly evolving world, especially from a regulatory and government perspective. We're tracking on 60 to 70 different regulations are happening around the world. And if you aren't looking at this, you really, really need to. On that note, US executive orders. We've had a number of major executive orders around critical infrastructure, national cybersecurity, and supply chain. In particular, the supply chain. These aren't just about, hey, how do I sell to the government? And the government's going to be, putting these controls in place. Well, those are true, but many of these new executive orders are much, much broader, and they're going to impact all the things that we think about in terms of our relationships, our connections, and our supply chains. So it's not just what you sell to the government, but it's going to impact, a lot of how we sell and service. Now, in terms of just the broader construct here too, you have to think about the ubiquitous connectivity. COVID really drove us into this sort of environment where everyone is connected. I mean, we are more connected now than we ever have been. And now with 5G, it's going to make everything more connected too. More devices are being delivered every day that have 5G baked into them, right? So from an IoT perspective and IoT, so our world is going to become, and has already become, much, much more connected. And of course, work from home, right? COVID was this giant proof of concept that we all can work from home, and that in that we're all able to operate in a very digital way in a digital world. And so that ties really well with that whole ubiquitous communication. But now we're also looking at balance, because as many of you, I myself, we're all going back to our offices, and we're working through the balance of what can still be do at work versus remotely. And of course, chip shortage, right? The semiconductor shortage is not going to go away in any short time. This is going to be something that's going to be year over year, at least for a couple more years. So we have to really think about how all of these things impact the software that's made by our companies, your company too. So in my mind, at least, the key to embracing security and privacy in software is having the right program, culture, and people to make it sustainable and to navigate these challenging times. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's sort of get directionally accurate with sort of the broader future of this, right? Big pieces of this really are, things like secure by design and all that implies. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Software development lifecycle, setting bar around how and what we should be doing and minimums across all of our enterprise, right? Check yourself. Are you doing cybersecurity the way you think you're doing? Are you doing it continuously in a way that you expected? More importantly, are you getting the results that you think you should, right? So you really need to make sure that you have ways to bring that information back and part of your thinking process. And of course, you got to have a program and a team to get there. So what is secure by design? I think a lot of people, you hear those words and it's sort of the buzzword, and you think, oh yes, we have a secure by design program. But I want you to sort of step back with me and look at it from a slightly different vantage point, which is, when people talk about having a secure by design program, it implies you already have security. This isn't an aspirational goal, it is what you already do. And a really good way to sort of set the stage is, are you doing these things, right? If you look at these sets of chevrons, right, and they're continuous, right? Are you doing those? And so when I think about secure by design, in order to design it, you must know it. So that means you must have trained your people. You must have those people, your engineering, your development organization, knowing how to do good security, right? In order to develop it, you must have requirements for it. So you have to have requirements in your your process early into the development process that drives those requirements in. If you don't, then how are you ensuring that you actually have security baked in? In order to release it, you must be able to test it, right? And so when you think about testing in terms of not just, hey, quality checks and did I write the right code, but it's also testing with SaaS and DaaS tools, making sure that the code you're releasing is secure, right? And so what I ask everybody to sort of think about is, does your program really address these things, right? Are you thoughtfully incorporating these things? Because that's what a secure by design mindset requires. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be useful to sort of take us through an example of a secure software development lifecycle, or SDLC, right? As you can see, these are pretty typical things, right? You start, you have requirements, design, develop, testing, development, maintenance, operations. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the intent here is really to give you a feel for the things a program needs to have. And you'll notice in the start portion of this, it's not just, hey, go get your requirements. It's do you have somebody doing these things like an architect or an advocate around security, right? Are people trained? Have they completed that training before they begin this process? And I would say these are really important attributes to ensuring the success of the rest of the program. And a lot of times people just look at the sort of requirements and the deployment side of it. I think you got to really think about how you started. Are people well educated and informed to do the right things? And then as you travel through this, your security and privacy requirements are baked in all the way through. And I think companies have to think this way all the way along the line, obviously having threat models and things like that. But I'd also sort of point out some things too, like having a PIA review during a deployment. Make sure that you're thoughtfully incorporating, security and privacy into the design where applicable of the products and services you sell and support. And then the last thing I would really point out here is leadership sign-off. When you think about how and what you're delivering, one of the things I've found as being a really excellent way to drive the maturity of an organization is by making everybody accountable in the process, right? Going all the way back to the developers who develop the code, going through to their managers and to their leadership and to their business, saying, okay, are you doing that security? Show me what we've done. And looking at that as part of the sign-off process for the release of that product. Saying, okay, what security requirements did you have? How were you applied them? What vulnerabilities or issues did you find? How did you address them? And making sure people all thoughtfully walk through that. Having that leadership sign-off is so important because it drives that accountability all the way back. And it also makes people much more thoughtful in making sure that, hey, I am trained to do this. I understand the expectation on me. Because really, as you sort of see this line above, right, the cost to fix those bugs after deployment is huge, right? It's 10 to 30 times more expensive after deployment. And so it's very inexpensive to address it while it's in your development process, but it's a lot more challenging later. And so having these sign-offs become really important part of that evolution of your business. So let's dive into a little bit about some things that might help you and have helped me in my sort of navigating this road trip of security. Some of this ties back to how and what is happening in both regulation and our world, right? One of the things I tell people is that you really need to thoughtfully think about having a minimum set of requirements that are universal and ubiquitous across all of your development. So what that means is really, instead of having that sort of older strategy of, hey, I only have a few resources, and so I'm only going to sort of focus all my attention on my top 10, right? I think those days are over. I think you really, especially in the world we live in today, you have to sort of have a universal program, a universal set of minimums that go across your entire enterprise of software. And that's got to be ubiquitously applied to everything and everywhere, right? And not just, oh, I'm only doing that on releases, my patches I don't worry about. No. It has to be applied everywhere and anytime you release. And can be challenging. It's also a mindset shift that people have to think about in terms of how do I actually support that model? Because it's hard, and especially in an environment where you've been working towards, hey, these are the top 10 things, and I'm not worrying about the low bar sorts of items. Of course, the other items here too are identity for all devices and instances. As you look at the NISTers and the policies and things that are coming out of not only government, but also our customers, right? Everything needs to have an identity. You need to know that that device in that office or that home is that device and not the one right next door to it or the one next to it on the wall, right? That means it needs to have a unique identity, a unique identifier. And it's super important, especially when you think about patch management and security and risk in an environment. Of course, digitally sign all code, right? Everything should be signed. And not just the code that you make, but even the code that you use to make code, right? Patch management via over the air. This is a big one. We're in a world now where we're all connected, right? We have to be thinking about how we are connecting the infrastructure and be on top of that, right? And so by design, we need to be thinking about making sure all of our software is capable of over-the-air update wherever humanly possible. Of course, encryption, we've all heard this years, and so I'm not going to belabor this because, encryption of our communications and at rest, it's just a fundamental everybody needs. But yet we still see challenges, right? You hear about breaches all the time. Oh, they forgot to flip the bit and make that encrypted. What I would tell you on this is it's more of a point of, are you really doing it? I made that point early on, is we need to all thoughtfully be checking ourselves and checking our environments for the things we thought we put in place, right? And so that includes encryption, right? Make sure that in your cloud environments that encryption is turned on. Go look, go make sure these things are done the way you think you're supposed to have them. Because you may find that, something happened 2 months ago, 6 months ago, and somebody changed a setting and now it's not, right? That's the thing that's going to really catch you up. And that's the thing that you have to pay attention to. Privacy for you and your customers. Take a page right out of your GDPR program and universally apply it. It's a wonderful way to set a standard and a bar that sets protection of privacy, not only for you, but really your customers too. And of course, ensure your SDLC has security. So some of you are probably familiar with the term NPI, new product introduction. And you probably have some sort of methodology in your company that says, here's how we do development, right? Z21, NPI, all these things. What I would tell you is make sure that cybersecurity is baked into that process itself, so that the process your organization operates under is by its very design ensuring the security of the things that it's making. A lot of times people sort of have these things as separate, and I would tell you putting them together is probably the best thing that you can do in order to ensuring the things that come out of it are secure. And again, it sounds really simple, but in my experience, it's actually really hard to do, to get all the PMOs, all the organizations to really think that way. But once you have it, it makes a huge benefit in adoption. And then of course, hardware security. As we talked about these other elements, right? You've got to make sure that the hardware that you put your software on is actually secureable, right? We've seen numerous cases where people don't think about that. They're always thinking about the lowest, cheapest cost of a chip, and that's what I'm going to buy. And really, sometimes if you don't really think about security as part of that design, then they're going to find the 10-cent chip, right, or the 15-cent chip, and for a penny or 10 cents more, that can have trusted boot or can support encryption. That makes a real difference in our ability to actually have a full platform of secure solutions. And so I really challenge you, if you have people designing hardware, right, think about that in your design for sure at the beginning, and make sure that you can be capable of security. Supply chain security, we'll talk more about this, but really this is, in my mind, it's really simple. Do unto others as you've done to yourself. So you built all of these programs, these cybersecurity minimums, these identities, these patch management, and you have this set of requirements, maybe from OWASP or whomever, right? Are you applying that to your suppliers, right? To those outsourcers who you've now outsourced your software, some of your software development to? Have you, give it to the company that's doing your fabs and your chip and your PCBs, right? Who then are, building firmware, right? They need to have these same expectations put on them, so your products are actually secure when you get them. I mean, if you don't pass that down through your supply chain to these companies, how are they going to know to do it? More to the point, you're not going to get it by default from them unless you help educate them and draw them into that discussion, right? Because this is a new world, especially for smaller companies and companies that haven't been demanded of this in the past. And of course, my last is probably my favorite, which is really education, right? You've got to make sure that you're educating your customers, the installers, right? People who are putting whatever your software or solution in need to understand how the security features work and why they're there and what are the benefits of it, right? And that also goes to sales organizations. All of those people need to understand that in a meaningful way to them, so that you're not only doing the security, but you're actually able to get the benefit of security out of it. All right, so jumping right along, let's talk about lessons learned from DevSecOps. So great. Those are a set of ideals and things that you can apply and go do in terms of how you might set your own set of minimums for your company. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about is, the broader context of great. So you've got these things, but how do you know those things are working well, and how does that apply to your organization? And this goes back to a comment I made early on in our discussion, which is, make sure you're really performing the things you think you're performing, right? Whether it's SaaS and DaaS and open source scans, right? Go look, right? And what I challenge people to do is really make sure that you've got, clear line of sight into those technologies. What I find is, once you start digging in, sometimes you find, oh, well, we do it for this, but this object's too big, or this is different. I've talked to a lot of companies around the globe, and when I sort of dig into this particular topic specifically, we have these questions, and they're like, oh yeah, we've got Veracode, or we got so and so, or who, Coverity in place, and we do this, and it's all great. And then when we sort of sit down across the table and start, oh well, we do it for our major releases. This is really resource intensive, so we only run this, every quarter or every other release. Well, is that really enough? Is that right? Is that aligned back to your company's goals, right? And I think that oftentimes is a real question that comes up because of resourcing, frankly. I've only got 5 people, so I can only look at so many things, and so we only pay attention to so many things. And that's why a universal program has to be in place, right? And that's also one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is really education is so important, because you got to make sure your developers understand how to run these tools, that they're configured and set up correctly, so that they are run and run regularly when you expect them to be run. And of course, this goes back to the next point, really, is, leverage your cyber experts to improve the developer security and their features, right? I've come across companies where my cyber guys, they're the ones that are over there doing the threat model, and they do all the, environmental scoring. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why? Your developers, everybody should know how to do a threat model. Right? If you're the designer, you're the architects, then we should make sure you know how to do that. It's just another tool. When we think about quality and other things that people do in code reviews, these are all just tools and techniques that everybody should know how to do. Sure, cyber experts should know how to do it better and actually help you get through things faster and more efficiently. Absolutely, that is absolutely part of my team's job. And it also, frankly, is part of their job is to make sure that the features, right, helping the developers design security features into the products themselves, right? Which ties nicely back to my point of, we've got to make sure that whatever the tools that you have, by whomever they're from, that they're baked into your tool chain, right? And link the results to the tickets and backlog. So whether you're using, tools like Raleigh or Jira, it should automatically produce a reasonable set of output of vulnerabilities, issues that have to be addressed, which then dump right into their Jira backlog, which then they manage like any other, bug or activity or requirement. The key to a really well-built tool set and tooling for cybersecurity is really making it simple and easy and simple and accessible to the developer themselves. So everything looks just like everything else that they do. Oftentimes I've seen companies that have, we don't actually have our open source tool directly embedded in that. We have it embedded in something else, or it's standalone, and then they sort of pick through what they want and they pop it into their tickets. Well, that's just more work for your developers. And more to the point, oftentimes you've got orphaned vulnerabilities, orphan information that was stuck in that system that never gets to your environment. So you sort of get into this situation of sort of unknown unknowns. And so again, you've gone to all this trouble to buy these fantastic tools. Make sure that they're really getting the value by integrating them all the way through. And which allows you then to the last point, really, which is instrument the process so you can see where problems are happening, right? And this is super important, because if you're not really have any type of reporting above the tools, then you're not going to know or see issues that are happening across your enterprise. And not just, hey, I've got, too many vulnerabilities here, but really seeing trends across your organization. Well, what products have the most vulnerabilities? Where are these happening? Why aren't these things being caught early in the development cycle versus later? And I don't know if anybody can see sort of, hopefully it looks okay on the screen, but there's this funky trend line in the background in the far lower right corner. And what that is CVEs per year over year. And what you can tell is right around 2016, we had sort of open source vulnerabilities. It was sort of trending okay, and then whoosh, it went up. And that's real work that every single one of your developers are living with today, because everybody's got open source, right, in their software. Everybody does. And in that sense, you have to manage it. And I think that's a sort of an unknown sort of workload, maintenance workload that are on developers that I don't think people pay close attention to. And this is something I try to highlight to leadership around the globe and other companies, is that you have that responsibility. You've made the decision, just like we did and everybody else, to put it, but you also have now a responsibility to shepherd that open source and maintain it and take care of it and manage it, right? You can't just orphan it. And so this is a big, big part of the workload when you have open source, is you have to really consciously manage it. Otherwise, you just create an enormous backlog of real vulnerabilities in the products and services that you sell. So great. Wow, that's great information about how and sort of what you should be thinking about in terms of your own programs. I don't know where to start. What do I do, and where do I know kind of where I am? Because it's hard to get someplace if you don't know where you are. And so what I try to tell people is a great way to start is, choose a model. There's tons of maturity models out there to work from. And personally, I'm a big fan of BSIM, Building Security into Maturity Model, and CMMI. And what I would suggest is, like, BSIM is simple because it's free and it's online. You can go get it. And you can also see like 12 years of examples and output from all these different companies, which of course Honeywell is also participating in some of those too. And so you can sort of benchmark yourself against what other people are doing. And again, BSIM, the nice thing about it is you can do it yourself, right? Over a course of a week, a little bit longer, you can sort of, eyeball where you are and what you need to do and where your company is going. And, have a sort of directionally accurate plan. Okay, these are the things I need to do next. And what are my needs that are relevant to my company? And then if you start getting, deeper into that, then you can always bring in a third party to come in and sort of assess you. And then that might give you a broader context beyond just your perspective. And then this also ties nicely to something that I think really highly about, which is this concept we have as audit to coach. I came up with this a few years ago, which is this idea of, a team or part of my organization that assesses our maturity in our process of cybersecurity all along the way. And so we randomly pick programs, we sort of grab them and sort of, hey, do you have the materials? Do you run these tools? Did they work? And what was your outcome? What was your results? And what'd you do? And then, okay, that looks reasonable. Okay, that's good. And you open source scanner. Okay, great. That looks good. And we go through the whole process sort of wing to wing. And if we find gaps or problems, we pivot. We pivot to coaching them. Because our job in my organization is not to be a cop ever. Our job is to deliver secure products and software. And so our job is to help those developers to release secure software. And so we pivot, we coach them, we help them through that process right then, right there, so that they release their software with all the things that they need and that they're successful. And that makes such a huge difference. And that ties very nicely into culture. Culture is such an important part of a program around software. And I think it's often overlooked. And and a lot of it has to do with where your company's at, where your cybersecurity program started, and how you think about security. And that's why I kind of start off with sort of this concept of this idea of secure software versus compliance. I think you have to start with this ideal that you're there to help release software, right? That's your job. Your job is not to be a compliance engine and sort of, hey, here's your bugs, go fix. It's I'm here to help you deliver something. And I think that mindset is one that's not always seen. And that's where I would challenge everybody to sort of step back and sort of be look at how your organization operates. Are you driving to help the business to deliver the software, or are you more of a compliance sort of old school IT mindset of, hey, we're just injecting this and being a cop? And I always tell my people, if you feel like you're being a cop, right, then something's wrong, right? You're too late, right? Because in reality it means that something that should have been influenced early on didn't get influenced and didn't happen, and so you're here. That is not necessarily their fault. Frankly, it can be the organization, can be lots of different reasons. But the idea is to get us to recognize that we've got to change the culture earlier in the process, so that you don't find yourself acting and having to be a cop to stop things, right? And this also drives the other piece: inclusivity versus exclusivity. It's having that inclusive mindset with your people, your organization, how you think, and embracing and drawing people in, versus sort of the older sort of security mindset where everything was, you guys remember this sort of black hat, trench coat sort of. That's not the world we live in, right? The world we live in today is much more integrated. And you can't have that mindset of holding those cards to yourself. You have to be a lot more interactive and inclusive, drawing these people in to help them, because they may not always understand that. And it's your job to help them understand that, which ties into make sure everybody belongs, whether it's your engineering, your software development team, your cybersecurity team. Build robust communities where they intersect, that those two knowledge bases intersect together and work together and collaborate as a unit, versus, oh, that's IT or that's security. In my world, the fact that most people in our release trains can't tell the difference between a developer and one of my staff is wonderful, right? That, to me, it says we're doing our job, because that means we are integrated into the way they think and the way they operate, and we're all focused on ultimately delivering value and benefits to our company. Which leads me to my topic here is value. Value your team, respect and reward the tech. I think sometimes people have forgotten how challenging it is to have this kind of skill around cybersecurity, especially product cybersecurity. And I think we have to thoughtfully respect and reward that technical experience, and also teach the behaviors, right? Part of what I also have in my program is making sure to teach some of our teams, things like, executive presence, how to present, how to get to yes, teaching them techniques to make them more successful in not just navigating change, but also communicating it. Right? When you can branch and build and merge into this community, this technical expertise, and then these behaviors, man, you've got powerful people, great people. And then, of course, be integrated with the development team, right? The intimacy with the development organization is so important, right? It's so important in how we think and how we organize and are successful. And my last comment here is, share and give away everything, right? All of your documents, all your materials, we work across all these 5 different businesses. And our team, one of the benefits that people see from our team is the fact that we cross-pollinate all the time. We're sharing best practices from Arrow with HBT and with all these different units so that everybody benefits from the knowledge and is able to work faster and better. So on that, talking about people for a minute, right? Competition for this kind of talent is fierce, right? It's challenging. It is difficult to find cybersecurity experts. This is a known fact. This is happening at a government level. It's happening at an industry level. It's happening. It's a global challenge. This is not going to go away. Hasn't gone away for years. There's been negative unemployment for cyber experts for as long as I can remember. And what I tell you is that I don't really see that changing anytime soon. A little coffee there. What I also tell you from my own experience is that I find it easier to take and look into the organization I'm supporting, software developers, and we call them engineers, and taking those individuals and growing them into an expert is faster and easier. And I would challenge you to think the same way, right? It's, look at that community that you're supporting and look for people, the passionate few, as I like to call them, and draw them out and fund their training and education to make them cybersecurity experts and then bring them into your team. We have a program called Advocates Community where we not only train everybody on cybersecurity, which is good, it's important, but we have an additional levels of training that then take them through and make them better, stronger, smarter on these topics. And what I tell you is you should think about doing something like that as well, right? Some people call it code ninjas and advocates, but you get my point. You really want to find and grow those individuals. It's a great career path, and not only for them, but also for your business and your company. Which leads me into education. And education is the cornerstone of great software security, right? It is the very nature of how you get large body of people doing the right thing at the right time and making sure it's sustainable, right? So build your education program with social media models, right? I talked early on about the challenges we all face with now, work from home and ubiquitous connectivity, right? You need to think about the social media models that are out there. Make sure your education systems and content are actually accessible through those systems so people can consume them 24/7, right? Make sure there's also a very clear understanding of introductions and levels so that people can sort of navigate through successfully at different levels, and they can do it at their own pace and, frankly, in a way that they're used to, whether it's online, in person, podcasts. The more you make that content available on all these different social media models, the better. And it's all upside for you, really. It's all upside for your company. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit about education. And I'm sure you guys have seen this. Oh, everybody needs to be, different types of education. And that's true. But I want to highlight one really important thing in my mind, which is stewardship. Stewardship in my world is the ability and focus to train your leadership, not when there's a crisis, but all the time proactively about their role in being a great steward for your program, ensuring that your program is understood and what their obligation is to help maintain the security and the integrity of the company, right? Educating your leadership about their stewardship responsibility is a huge win because this helps you when a crisis does happen, everybody already sort of understands. So I've talked to my VP HR and my CFO all sort of understand their responsibility in this because they understand we've talked about these things in terms of security. And so if a problem comes up, they understand it in a context that's meaningful to them. And what I tell you is you should really think about doing that for your company, because it helps establish that minimum bar for everybody in terms of where their head's at and what they're thinking about. Team considerations, right? Staffing, you got to think about how and where your staff is, and what is required to do the job. A lot of times the big challenge people have is, I don't have enough people. Okay, I get that. And this is where, again, BSIM and things will help you in estimating, right? So, some ratios are also really great ways to sort of set the stage, right? Is it, maybe, 1 to 35, so 1 cyber person to 35 developers, or 1 to 50, right? But if your ratios are really wacky and it's like, 1 cyber person to 200 people, there's probably something wrong there, and there's some work to be done, and you need to be thinking about. Shared roles, right? Part-time versus, full-time. I really think full-time is such a critical part to being successful in this area, because the skill and the knowledge and the training that's required demands that continuous focus. And it's proven itself over and over that, part-time, if I'm only, part-time pen testing and doing development the rest of the time, you're going to miss things. And that means you're going to get unknown vulnerabilities in your software. So think about that. And then, of course, as you build your team, right, track it as if you were an HR person, right? Manage that as if you're HR organization. How, when are those interviews? How are those interviews going? How, making sure everybody has that responsibility to onboard the best possible talent in your organization. Because really, I tell people all the time, cybersecurity is a team sport. And so you better build a team to be successful. So we talked a lot about ways to make you successful, and sort of lessons learned I've had in my life. And what I thought I would do is just sort of quickly summarize back down to, what are some of the actions you can take in terms of walking away from our discussion today, right? And just as a reminder, right, the first one is assess yourself, right? Do you have the right program? Dig in, really see what are the gaps that you might have in your organization. Use tools like BSIM to sort of help you figure that out. 2, educate, right? From developers to executives, right? Ensure your content is relevant and consumed. So often people, I've got this great training program, but is it consumed? How do you know? Do you have metrics to show you that people are actually taking those courses? If they're not, they could just be shelfware or, sitting on some website. You really, really need to dig in and understand what the consumption of your education is across your organization. And then don't forget the stewardship program. I can't stress that enough, right? That proactive relationship building with your executive team, your organization at all levels on what their, duties are in terms of being a good steward for cybersecurity in the company is so critical. And it really changes the game when it comes to budgeting and strategic thinking of your company. And of course, 3, build, right? There's no one example. If I showed you a whole laundry list of things you can do in terms of making your program robust and frankly, where the industry and the world's going, right? They're a little bit like Tinker Toys. You can sort of put them together and build your program. There's no sort of absolute one way. There's still a lot of companies doing waterfall and agile safe. So it's okay. But the point is, you got to build it if it isn't there, or add to it if it is. And then the last thing I would say is share, right? I mentioned before about giving away everything, and that's so true, and that's kind of one of the things that makes a great culture in an organization is being able to share all of that knowledge across the entities, not just within your own cybersecurity community, but your engineering community as well. And doing things like what I'm doing today, right? Sharing with all of you, right? Give back and grow, right? And in particular about your own company is, share your findings from what you figured out from your assessment, right? With your leadership. Help them see the gaps so that they can help you build the program that really builds on and makes your program more secure and more robust and frankly aligned with the future of where things are going. So with that, thank you. That's the end of my presentation. And I again, really appreciate everybody's time today. What I'd say is probably any questions from the audience as I come back here and stop sharing. All right, let me see if I can pull up our audience participation tool here. All right, there's a couple of questions. So if you go into the QA box and throw out your questions, I'll just read the ones I see here. In the case where we find challenges in training developers and engineers into security experts or embedded engineers, what are your thoughts on training QA resources and embedded engineers? Oh, QA people are some of the best people to train as cybersecurity experts, right? They're already, you sort of know where all the dead bodies are buried. They're typically developers to begin with. And so absolutely agree that taking them through the advocates program and growing them into cybersecurity experts is an excellent idea. In fact, oftentimes I find QA staff as being some of the best to convert into pen testers as opposed to architects, because they already have that sort of evil bit mindset. Hey, I do these things and we'll sort of make this work the way we want. So yes, QA people, I love you. You should become, and if you want to become cybersecurity experts, part of that community, absolutely. And there's a lot of training for that as well. I love your idea on establishing baseline requirements that would, see, in case, where'd it go? Oh, sorry, they moved them around. I love your idea of establishing baseline requirements that would apply to all products you develop. What would you say are the key steps, resources, and tools to get this started? Frankly, doing some of the BSIM work is a great, first steps, because you need to sort of understand your own maturity of your own organization, and also you need to think about things like what the cadence of your organization is, how well or how quickly they're going to consume stuff. But a big part of it is understanding the obligations of your customers, right? Or whether the customers are putting on you, whether that's regulatory. And that helps then set the framework. I'm getting asked to do these things and I don't have those things. And so what does that mean? And so that's where these minimums starts really kicking in, because every one of those minimums you can take and they're directly accurate to regulations or things going around the globe that are significant from most companies. So you can literally rip that page, so hopefully you guys snapshot it and start going down the list of what that means for you. Next question. As an executive, what advice do you have for engineers that want to bring forward proposals or recommendations that need executive support, such as culture change or sizable budget? How should they approach executive buy-in? Oh, man, I love that conversation. What I would tell you is, again, if you have already been thinking about and doing stewardship, that answer is much easier, right? If the first time your CFO or your VP meets you is for asking for money or because something's on fire, that's not going to go well, right? You need to understand the long game here. And the long game is go off and talk to these people, build the relationships now, invest in helping them understand not only what it should be and what good cybersecurity looks like, but then, as you mature your narrative with them, you help them start understanding the sort of cracks and the issues with your program, right? You sort of start off the narrative with, this is what good cybersecurity is. This is all the pieces you should have. And you work that narrative to the point of, okay, now let's talk about us and what we have. And, oh, well, we don't really have this. And that is how you get buy-in, right? And yes, it takes time. It takes investing time. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to do this over the course of a month. And this is multiple months and maybe even a year. And also recognize you may not win everything you think in that year. It's the long game. And that's where you need to really consciously say, okay, this is what we got money for and resources for. This is what I am going to do. And this is what I'm not going to do. And it's okay to say what you're not going to do. In fact, it's really important you do, because that sets you up for your next conversation of, well, let's talk about that, because I really want you to do some of that. Okay, well, I don't have money or resources to do that. I'd love to, but I can't. And that's a way to trigger that conversation. The next one, in the case where we find challenges in training developers, engineers into security experts, or embedded engineers, what are your thoughts on training QA resources as embedded engineers? Absolutely. It's like my earlier comment. Obviously we have a lot of QA people on this call, which is great. You should absolutely be training those communities. In fact, what I find the best way to sort of there's this constant revolving loop of developers who become QA people, who become software developers, who become QA, and that's a great way. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing firmware or software or cyber, right? All people can flow through that whole loop. That's why it's called Sec DevOps, right? And I think there's lots of opportunities for that. So I would strongly recommend people think about that as a career path. I think I've got time for one or two more questions. In practice, what's your experience in how long it takes to implement the framework and culture that you described into your organization? It's not a one-year trip, right? It's a lifestyle. And I've been at Honeywell for now about 5 years. Again, it depends on the maturity of the organization, where you're starting from, and the cadence. In other words, the way and speed they'll consume whatever it is you're trying to do, because there's business other issues and things like that. But typically, sort of from really challenging, limited program to something robust and very sustainable, it's probably 2 to 3 years. I wish it were faster. And I think I've got fantastic, and I started out with really good support. So it can be longer. What I would tell you is, I don't know in this day and age that you could take that long. And I think the benefit to everybody is, because of all these crises, I think leadership are much more sensitive to this problem. And so you could probably get there faster. But I don't think it's any less than 12, and probably more like 18. Got one more. Thinking of education, are there a couple of industry certifications in recent you should use or prep or study? Good coffee. Yes. So CSSLP, right? Certified Secure Software Development Lifecycle Expert, right? Wonderful. I suggest that to everybody. If you want to go get certified, that's a great one for this. And it teaches you everything I've just talked about, all in the package. And no, I don't mean everybody should go out and get certified. That's not necessary. But what I will tell you is this. I tell people, look, I'll pay for your certification. I don't care where you are, right, in the organization, because there's no downside. There's, people are going to go on their own time and go take this training and knowledge and growth, and they'll go, figure it out, read the manual. And paying for a certification is like a couple $100, right? And it's money well spent, because it's all upside. And people have just burnt all their personal time and their own, because they're passionate about it. Why not? And so I tell people all the time, these sorts of common standards and certifications are great. Sure, CISSP, I've got one of those myself. But for us, when we talk about software development, CSSLP is great. There's others under ISA. You should go look, isa.org. And of course, there's lots around automation, particularly around ISA IEC 62443. It's a great standard when it comes to automation, which frankly, probably most of the software you're making out there, it's applicable, especially if you have devices. Well, I think I'm pretty close to my time, but maybe I can squeeze in one more. A lot of security experts I connect with seem to have the same challenge of meeting business requirements and engineering requirements in their SDLC. How do you balance the demand of both parties, business and engineering? Well, I'll tell you, the intersection is PI planning, right? So, and what that means is really that. I mean, you have to have, not at a sort of executive level, but at a business level, at a product level is where that battle is really had. And that's why that stewardship conversation comes into play. If your product managers understand cybersecurity because you've trained them and they understand it, that conversation during PI planning, when you're sort of looking at what should get into this next release, what features, capabilities go into that next release, well, that's how you do this, right? And so you can win those battles, which then many of those build into your program. So with that, I think I'm at my time. Thank you all, really. I really appreciate the questions and the conversation. It's been fantastic. I hope you have a wonderful day today and you learn a lot from these sessions. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.